The dust cloud rising from the parched Arizona earth was visible for miles that scorching afternoon in July of 1873. And when it finally settled near the outskirts of Gila City, Grayson Nolan could see the woman stumbling along the road like a drunk about to face her reckoning. He had been tracking elk through the mountains surrounding the settlement when he spotted her from his vantage point, her tiny figure weaving between the sagebrush and desert willow. Something about her gait set his instincts screaming that she was in trouble. Grayson urged his horse down the rocky slope, his muscled arms flexing as he gripped the reins, shoulder-length dark hair whipping behind him in the dry wind. He had spent the last 8 years living in these unforgiving mountains, trapping and hunting, building a solitude that suited him after the war had taken everything gentle from his soul. But even a man who preferred the company of wilderness to civilization could not ignore someone clearly in distress. As he drew closer, Grayson could make out more details. She wore a faded blue dress that had once been fine but was now covered in dust and sweat stains. Her dark blonde hair had escaped whatever pins had once held it, hanging in damp tangles around her shoulders. She carried a canvas bag that looked far too heavy for her slender frame, and she kept switching it from hand to hand, as though neither arm had the strength to bear it alone. Then, just as Grayson was about to call out to her, she simply folded. There was no drama to it, no cry for help. Her knees gave out and she crumpled to the desert floor like a puppet with cut strings, the bag tumbling from her grasp and spilling its contents across the red dirt. Grayson kicked his horse into a gallop, covering the remaining distance in seconds. He swung down from the saddle before the animal had fully stopped, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. The woman lay on her side, eyes closed, breathing shallow and rapid. Her face was flushed an angry red despite the pallor underneath, and when he knelt beside her and touched her forehead, her skin burned like a forge fire. "Madam, can you hear me?" His voice came out rougher than he intended, years of sparse conversation making it gravelly and deep. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. A soft moan escaped her cracked lips. Grayson glanced around at what had spilled from her bag. Medical supplies, he realized. Bandages, bottles of tinctures, packets of herbs. His jaw tightened. He had heard talk in town during his rare supply runs about a doctor's assistant who had been working herself to exhaustion caring for the sick. Some fever had swept through the mining camps, and the town's only physician was an old drunk more interested in his whiskey bottle than his patients. That left the bulk of the real healing to his young assistant, a woman from back east who had come west with her father before he died of a heart ailment 2 years back. Grayson scooped up the medical supplies and stuffed them back into the bag, then turned his attention to the woman. She was small, maybe 5 feet and a few inches, and even accounting for her heavy skirts, she could not weigh much. Years of hauling elk carcasses and bear pelts had built impressive strength in his arms and shoulders, muscles layered thick across his chest and back. Lifting her was effortless. She felt like nothing in his arms, far too light, as though she had not been eating properly in addition to working herself into the ground. He settled her across his saddle, then climbed up behind her, cradling her against his chest as he turned the horse toward the mountains. Taking her back to Gila City made no sense. Whatever had driven her to collapse would still be there, waiting to consume her again the moment she regained consciousness. The sick would call for her, the desperate would pound on her door, and she would rise from her sick to answer because women like her always did. No, she needed rest, real rest, away from obligations and demands. His cabin was 2 hours into the high country, nestled in a valley where a cold stream ran year-round and pine trees provided shade from the relentless summer sun. It was not much, but it was cool and quiet, and it was exactly what she needed. The woman stirred a few times during the ride, mumbling words Grayson could not make out. He kept one strong arm wrapped around her waist, holding her secure, while his other hand managed the reins. The horse knew the way home and needed little guidance, picking its path through the rocks and scrub brush with the confidence of long practice. As they climbed into the higher elevations, the temperature dropped, and the air grew sweeter with the scent of pine and cedar. Grayson's cabin came into view as they crested a ridge. It was larger than most mountain dwellings, built from solid logs he had cut and notched himself. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and a stone chimney rose from one end. Behind it stood a small barn for his horse and the mule he used to haul supplies. A vegetable garden, carefully fenced against deer, grew beside the house. He dismounted carefully, lifting the woman down with him. She was burning hotter now, her breathing more labored. Grayson carried her inside and laid her on his bed, the only real piece of furniture in the single-room cabin besides a table, 2 chairs, and the shelves he had built into the walls. The bed was sturdy, built to hold his considerable weight, with a thick mattress stuffed with pine needles and covered in furs and wool blankets. First things first. He needed to cool her down before the fever cooked her brain. Grayson grabbed a bucket and headed to the stream, filling it with icy mountain water. Back inside, he set the bucket beside the bed and found clean cloths in his supply chest. He hesitated only a moment before beginning to unfasten the buttons running down the front of her dress. Propriety be damned. The woman would die if he worried about modesty. He worked efficiently, stripping away the heavy dress and the multiple petticoats underneath until she lay in just her thin cotton chemise and drawers. Even through the modest undergarments, he could see how thin she had become, her collarbones sharp, her arms lacking the soft roundness of a well-fed woman. Anger stirred in his chest at whoever had allowed her to work herself into this state. Grayson dipped a cloth in the cold water and began running it over her face, neck, and arms. She gasped at the shock of it, her eyes finally opening. They were blue, he noticed, a deep blue like the sky just before full dark. What? Her voice was barely a whisper. "You collapsed on the road," Grayson said, his tone gentler than before. "You have a fever, need to cool you down." She tried to sit up, but he placed a firm hand on her shoulder, holding her in place with almost no effort. "You need to stay still." "My patients," she protested weakly. "They need me." The Henderson's baby, she was getting worse, and Thomas Finch, his leg wound was showing signs of infection, and they will have to manage without you. Grayson dipped the cloth again and laid it across her forehead. "You are in no condition to help anyone." Tears welled in her blue eyes. "You do not understand. There is no one else. Dr. Marsh is useless, drunk before noon most days. If I am not there, then they will figure something out." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Right now, my concern is keeping you alive. Cannot help anyone if you are dead." The bluntness of his words seemed to rob her of whatever fight she had left. She closed her eyes again, tears leaking from the corners to run into her hair. "I cannot stop. There is too much to do. You already stopped. Your body made that choice for you." Grayson continued his methodical cooling, wringing out the cloth and running it down her arms, across her chest, above the neckline of her chemise, down her legs. "What is your name?" "Diana," she whispered. "Diana Owens." "Grayson Nolan." He refreshed the cloth again. "How long have you been working like this, without proper rest?" Diana was quiet for a long moment. 3 weeks. That is when the fever started in the camps. At first it was just a few cases, but then it spread. Dr. Marsh said it was not his problem, that miners knew the risks when they took the work, but I could not just let them die. So you have been caring for dozens of sick miners alone for 3 weeks. Someone had to. Her voice held a note of defiance despite her weakened state. And who was caring for you? Grayson asked. Who was making sure you ate and slept? Silence answered him. He made a disgusted sound low in his throat. Thought as much. Over the next hour, her fever climbed higher despite his efforts. She began to shiver violently, though her skin still burned. Grayson piled blankets over her and kept up the cool compresses, forcing water between her lips whenever she was conscious enough to swallow. Night fell, and he lit the oil lamps, casting the cabin in warm, golden light. He made broth from dried elk meat and got some of it down her throat, then added wood to the fire as the mountain night turned cold. Around midnight, the fever broke. Sweat poured from her, soaking the bedding. Grayson worked quickly, stripping away the wet blankets and replacing them with dry ones, changing out her sweat-drenched chemise for one of his clean shirts that hung on her like a tent. Through it all, Diana remained barely conscious, compliant only because she lacked the strength to resist. When her temperature finally returned to something approaching normal, Grayson allowed himself to relax slightly. He pulled one of his chairs beside the bed and sat, elbows on his knees, watching her sleep. In the lamplight, with the harsh flush of fever faded, he could see she was pretty. Not in the delicate, ornamental way of the saloon girls in town, but with a strength in her features that spoke of determination and character. Her face was thin now, worn down by exhaustion, but good bones showed through. He found himself wondering what she looked like when she was healthy and rested, when her cheeks filled out and color returned to her skin. Diana slept through the remainder of the night and into the next day. Grayson dozed in his chair, waking periodically to check on her and add wood to the fire. Around noon, he heard her stirring and opened his eyes to find her staring at him with confusion. "Where am I?" Her voice was hoarse but stronger than before. "My cabin, in the mountains above Gila City." Grayson stood and poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup, bringing it to her. "How do you feel?" Diana struggled to sit up and he helped her, propping pillows behind her back. She took the cup with shaking hands and drank greedily. "Weak, confused. How did I get here?" "I found you collapsed on the road yesterday afternoon. You had a high fever. It broke during the night." He studied her face. "When did you last eat a full meal?" She frowned, thinking. "I am not sure. A few days ago. There was always something more urgent than eating." Grayson shook his head. "You stay there. I will make food." He turned to his small kitchen area, pulling out supplies. Within minutes, he had cornbread warming by the fire and eggs frying in a skillet. The smell made Diana's stomach growl audibly, and she blushed. Grayson hid a smile as he plated the food and brought it to her. She ate like someone starving, which she essentially was. He waited until she had cleaned her plate before speaking again. "You are staying here until you are properly recovered." Diana's eyes widened. "I cannot. My patients need me." "Your patients nearly killed you." Grayson's voice was flat, allowing no argument. "You are no good to anyone dead." "But you do not understand." "I understand that you worked yourself until your body gave out." He crossed his arms over his broad chest, muscles shifting visibly under his shirt. "I understand that no one was looking after you while you looked after everyone else. And I understand that if you go back now, the same thing will happen again within a week." Diana's face flushed with anger and shame. "So what would you have me do? Abandon people who depend on me? Let them suffer because I am too weak to handle the work? You are not weak." Grayson's tone softened slightly. "You are human. Humans need food, water, sleep. You cannot give from an empty cup. That is easy for you to say, sitting up here in your mountain paradise while people down in Gila City are dying." Her voice broke. You have no idea what it is like to have someone begging you to save their child, their husband, their mother, to know that you are the only hope they have. You are right. I do not know what that is like. Grayson pulled his chair closer to the bed and sat, leaning forward. But I do know what it is like to push yourself past all reasonable limits. I know what it is like to think you have to carry everything alone, and I know where that road leads. Something in his voice made Diana pause. She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the weathered face, the old scars visible on his forearms, the haunted edge to his gray eyes. The war, among other things. He did not elaborate. Point is, you are staying here for at least a week. You need rest, real rest. You need regular meals, and you need to regain the weight you have lost. A week, Diana's voice rose. That is impossible. I need to get back today. You cannot even stand without help, Grayson pointed out. How exactly do you plan to care for patients when you can barely care for yourself? She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Tears of frustration welled in her eyes. They need me. They will still need you a week from now. Better to return healthy and capable than to kill yourself trying to do the impossible. He stood. Now you should rest more. Your body has been through hell. Diana lay back against the pillows, exhausted by even that brief conversation. What about you? Do you not have things to do? Always things to do in the mountains, but nothing that cannot wait. Grayson moved to the door. I will be right outside if you need anything. Just call out. She watched him go, too tired to protest further. Within minutes, she had drifted back to sleep. True to his word, Grayson spent the afternoon working within earshot of the cabin. He chopped firewood, the rhythmic thunk of his axe providing a steady soundtrack. His muscles flexed with each swing, splitting logs with efficient precision. He checked on Diana every hour, finding her sleeping peacefully each time. As evening approached, he made a stew from dried venison, potatoes from his garden, and wild onions. The rich smell filled the cabin, and Diana woke to find him ladling it into bowls. That smells wonderful, she said, and Grayson was pleased to hear more strength in her voice. He helped her sit up again and handed her a bowl and spoon. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the clink of spoons against bowls. Finally, Diana spoke. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. Grayson considered the question as he sopped up stew with a piece of cornbread. I suppose because someone should, and because I happened to be in the right place at the right time. Most men would have taken me back to town. Most men would not have seen what would happen if they did. He met her eyes. You would have rested maybe one night before someone came pounding on your door with an emergency, and you would have gotten up to answer it because that is who you are. Diana looked down at her bowl. You seem very certain about who I am after knowing me for barely a day. Some things are obvious. Grayson stood and took her empty bowl. More, please. He refilled both their bowls and they ate seconds, then thirds. Diana could not remember the last time she had felt full. The constant gnawing hunger she had been living with for weeks finally eased. As Grayson cleaned up the dishes, she found herself studying him. He was a big man, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the cabin. But despite his size, he moved with quiet grace, economical in his motions. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, held back from his face with a leather thong. A thick beard covered his jaw, though he kept it neatly trimmed. Everything about him spoke of strength and competence, a man comfortable in his own skin and his own space. How long have you lived up here? Diana asked. 8 years, give or take, came west after the war ended, tried settling in town for a while, but it did not suit me. He hung the clean pot on a hook by the fire. Mountains are better, quieter, more honest. Do you not get lonely? Grayson shrugged. Sometimes. but I prefer being lonely to being surrounded by people and still feeling alone. At least here, the solitude is honest. Diana understood that better than she would have a month ago. She had been surrounded by people constantly these past weeks, yet had never felt more isolated. Everyone wanted something from her, needed something, but no one asked what she needed. This mountain man, this stranger, had shown her more genuine care in 24 hours than she had received from the entire town of Gila City in months. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me, for not taking me back." "No need for thanks." Grayson pulled off his boots and set them by the door. "You should sleep more. Healing takes time." "Where will you sleep?" Diana looked around the single-room cabin. The bed was the only proper sleeping space. "Got blankets and furs. Floor is fine." He was already pulling a bearskin from a shelf. "I cannot take your bed. This is your home. And you are recovering from fever and exhaustion. You get the bed." His tone made it clear the discussion was over. Diana wanted to argue but lacked the energy. She slid back down under the blankets, still wearing his oversized shirt. The bed smelled like him, she realized, like pine smoke and leather and something indefinably masculine. It was not unpleasant. In fact, she found it oddly comforting. Grayson banked the fire and extinguished most of the lamps, leaving just one burning low. He settled onto his makeshift bed on the floor with a quiet sigh. Within minutes, his breathing had evened out into the rhythm of sleep. Diana lay awake a while longer, staring at the rough beams of the ceiling. Her mind kept trying to race back to her patients, worrying about who was caring for them, whether they were getting worse. But exhaustion pulled at her like a heavy tide, and eventually she surrendered to it. She woke in the night to find moonlight streaming through the window and Grayson standing by it, looking out at something in the darkness. He wore only his trousers, his broad back and muscled shoulders pale in the silver light. Scars marked his skin, old wounds from a violent past. Diana studied them sleepily, wondering what stories they told before drifting off again. Morning brought the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Diana sat up to find Grayson already dressed and working at the stove. Sunlight streamed through the windows, brighter than she remembered seeing it in weeks. She realized she had slept through the entire night without waking, something that had not happened since the fever outbreak began. "Morning," Grayson said without turning around. "How do you feel?" Diana took stock of herself. Weak still, but the bone-deep exhaustion had eased somewhat. Her head was clear, no fever haze clouding her thoughts. "Better, stronger, good. Breakfast is almost ready." He plated eggs, bacon, and fried potatoes, bringing her a generous portion. As she ate, Diana asked, "What do you do up here? Besides hunt, I mean." "Trap in winter, sell the furs in spring, keep a garden, put up vegetables for the cold months, hunt and fish, make repairs to the cabin and barn. There is always work to do." Grayson sat across from her with his own plate. "Sometimes I act as guide for wealthy Easterners who want to hunt elk or bear. Pay is good for that." "Do you ever miss being around people?" "Not particularly. Most people are disappointing once you get to know them." He caught her expression and added, "Present company accepted." "You do not know me well enough to say that yet," Diana pointed out. "I know you worked yourself into collapse caring for others. That says plenty." Grayson finished his breakfast and stood. "I need to check my trap line and hunt today. We'll be gone most of the day. You need anything before I go?" Diana shook her head. "I think I can manage. There is food, water, books if you want something to read. Do not try to do too much. Rest is the whole point of this." He pulled on his boots and reached for his rifle by the door. "Grayson," Diana caught his attention before he left. "Be careful." Something flickered in his eyes at her concern. "Always am." After he left, Diana found herself at loose ends. She was accustomed to constant motion, constant demands on her time and energy. Being alone with nothing to do felt strange. She got up carefully, testing her legs. They were shaky but held her weight. She made her way around the cabin slowly, examining Grayson's sparse belongings. The books he mentioned were on a shelf by the bed. Classics mostly: Shakespeare, Homer, Dickens. She pulled down a worn copy of David Copperfield and settled back into bed with it. Reading for pleasure felt like the most decadent luxury imaginable. She lost herself in the story, only looking up when her eyes grew tired. The afternoon passed peacefully. Diana napped, woke and ate some bread and cheese Grayson had left out, then read more. As evening approached, she heard him return. He came in carrying 2 fat rabbits and a string of trout. "Good hunting?" Diana asked. "Good enough." Grayson hung the rabbits to drain and brought the trout to the kitchen area. "How was your day?" "Restful. Strange, but restful." Diana watched him work, skinning and gutting the fish with practiced efficiency. "Can I help with anything? You can sit there and continue resting." But his tone was mild, almost teasing. They fell into an easy pattern over the following days. Grayson would wake early, make breakfast for both of them, then head out to hunt or trap or work on various projects around the cabin. Diana would rest, read, and slowly regain her strength. At first, she could barely walk from the bed to the table without tiring. By the 3rd day, she could make it to the porch and sit in the sun. By the 5th day, she was helping with simple tasks like shelling peas from the garden or folding laundry. Grayson proved to be surprisingly good company. He was quiet by nature, but when he spoke he was thoughtful and often wryly funny. In the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk about everything and nothing. Diana told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about following her father west when her mother died, about learning medicine from watching him work and reading his books. "He was a good man, my father, a true healer. He never turned anyone away, regardless of whether they could pay." Diana stared into the flames. "When he died, I thought about going back east, but there was nothing there for me anymore, and the people here needed someone. So you stayed and became that someone." Grayson whittled a piece of wood as they talked, shavings curling away from his knife. "Even though it meant working with a drunk who took credit for your skill. Dr. Marsh has his license. I do not. In the eyes of the law, I am just his assistant." Bitterness crept into her voice. "Never mind that I am the one actually treating patients and saving lives." "Could you get your own license?" Diana laughed harshly. "I am a woman. Medical schools do not accept women except for a handful back east, and even if I somehow manage to earn a degree, most states will not grant licenses to female doctors." "That is horseshit," Grayson said flatly. "Yes. But it is the way things are." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The evenings were cool this high in the mountains, even in summer. "I do what I can within the limitations I have been given." They were quiet for a while, the only sound the crackling fire and the scrape of Grayson's knife against wood. Finally he said, "You are a remarkable woman, Diana Owens." She felt her cheeks warm, though whether from the fire or his words she was not sure. "I am just doing what needs to be done." "That is what makes you remarkable." As the week progressed, Diana found herself thinking less about her patients in town and more about the man sharing his home with her. She noticed small things about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he found something genuinely amusing. How gentle his hands could be despite their size and calluses, whether he was tending his garden or checking her fever. The quiet competence with which he approached every task. The protective way he watched over her, making sure she ate enough, rested enough, did not push herself too hard too fast. One evening, Diana caught herself staring at him as he stood at the stove making dinner. The lamplight played across his muscled shoulders and arms, highlighting the strength in every movement. His hair was loose tonight, falling past his shoulders in dark waves. She wondered what it would feel like to run her fingers through it, then immediately felt her face flame at the improper thought. Grayson must have felt her gaze because he turned and caught her looking. Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Something passed between them, unspoken but powerful. Diana's breath caught in her throat. "Dinner is ready," Grayson said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. They ate in near silence, the air between them charged with new awareness. Diana barely tasted her food, too conscious of Grayson sitting across from her, of his every movement and breath. When their hands accidentally brushed as they both reached for the salt, electricity seemed to spark between them. Grayson pulled back quickly, clearing his throat. "I should check the barn," he said abruptly, standing. "Horse was favoring her left front earlier." He was gone before Diana could respond, leaving her alone with her racing heart and confused thoughts. She cleaned up from dinner slowly, trying to understand what was happening. She barely knew this man. A week ago she had never even heard his name. Yet somehow, in the space of these few days, he had become important to her in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude for his help. Diana was sitting by the fire when Grayson returned an hour later. He had clearly been doing more than checking on his horse, taking time to compose himself. When he came in, his expression was carefully neutral. "Horse is fine," was just a pebble in her shoe. He hung his hat by the door but did not come further into the cabin. "Grayson." Diana stood to face him. "Can we talk?" He looked wary. "About what?" "About whatever is happening between us." She saw him tense and hurried on. "Or maybe I am imagining it. Maybe it is just me feeling this way, but I think you feel it too." "Diana." His voice was pained. "You have been here a week, 1 week, under strange circumstances. What you are feeling is probably just gratitude or the oddness of the situation, or do not tell me what I am feeling." She moved closer to him. "I am 26 years old, Grayson, old enough to know my own mind and heart. This is not gratitude, or if it is, that is only a small part of it." "You do not know me," he protested. "I am a mountain hermit with a violent past. You are an educated woman who heals people. We make no sense together. Since when does sense have anything to do with feelings?" Diana took another step, close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You have been kind to me. You saw me at my absolute lowest and did not turn away. You have cared for me without asking anything in return. You have listened to me, really listened, in a way no one has in longer than I can remember. Why would I not develop feelings for you?" Grayson stared down at her, conflict clear in his gray eyes. "If you knew the things I have done, the man I was during the war. We all have pasts. We all have things we are not proud of." Diana lifted her hand slowly, giving him time to move away if he wanted, and placed it on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palm. "I care about the man you are now, the man who saved my life, the man who makes me feel safe and valued." "Diana." Her name was barely a whisper. "You are going back to town, back to your life and your work. I live in the mountains, alone. Even if what you feel is real, how could it possibly work?" "I do not know," she admitted. "But does that mean we should not try? Should not explore what this might be?" For a long moment Grayson stood frozen. Then, with a low sound that was half surrender and half relief, he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. Diana pressed against his broad chest, feeling small and safe and utterly right in his embrace. His chin rested on top of her head, and she felt him take a shaky breath. "I am afraid," he said quietly. "Afraid that you will come to your senses and realize I am not worth this, that I will fail you somehow." Diana pulled back enough to look up at him. "And I am afraid that I am reading too much into kindness, that when I leave here you will forget about me in a week. Not possible." Grayson lifted one hand to cup her face, his calloused thumb brushing her cheek. "You have gotten under my skin, Diana Owens. Not sure I will ever be free of you now." "Good," she breathed, "because I do not want you to be free of me." When he kissed her, it was with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size and strength. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss tentative, as though he feared she might break or disappear. Diana rose on her toes, pressing closer, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. It was just as soft as she had imagined, thick and silky between her fingers. Grayson made a low sound in his throat and deepened the kiss, his arms tightening around her. Diana felt dizzy with sensation, her heart racing, heat pooling in her stomach. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Well," Diana said shakily, "that certainly answered some questions." A small smile tugged at Grayson's lips, created some new ones too, such as how I am supposed to sleep knowing you are 10 feet away from me in my bed. His voice was rough with desire and restraint. Diana blushed but met his eyes steadily. "Who says you have to?" Grayson closed his eyes briefly. "Diana, you are still recovering and we barely know each other. I will not take advantage. It is not taking advantage if I am offering freely." She touched his face, tracing the line of his beard. "But I understand if you want to wait. I just do not want you sleeping on the floor anymore when the bed is large enough for two." "That is a terrible idea." But even as he said it, Grayson was weakening. The thought of holding her through the night, of waking with her beside him, was almost irresistible. Then do it anyway. Diana took his hand and led him toward the bed. "We do not have to do anything but sleep. I just want to be close to you." They lay down together, still fully clothed, Diana fitting herself against Grayson's side. His arm came around her shoulders, holding her close, and she rested her head on his chest. She could hear his heart beating, strong and steady, beneath her ear. "This is nice," she murmured, already feeling sleep pulling at her. "Yes," Grayson agreed softly. "It is." He lay awake long after Diana's breathing had evened out into sleep, marveling at the woman in his arms. A week ago his life had been simple, predictable, solitary. Now everything had changed. He had changed. The walls he had built around himself, the carefully maintained isolation, all of it was crumbling in the face of Diana's presence. It terrified him. It also filled him with a hope he had not felt in years. Morning came too soon. Diana woke to find herself still wrapped in Grayson's arms, his body warm and solid beside her. It felt profoundly right, as though she had been waiting her whole life to wake up exactly like this. "Morning," Grayson's deep voice rumbled through his chest. "Good morning." Diana tilted her head to look at him. His hair was mussed from sleep, his eyes soft. "Did you sleep well? Better than I have in years." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "How are you feeling? Strong, healthy, ready to face the world again?" The words tasted bitter despite their truth. She had known this week could not last forever, but she had not expected to feel such reluctance about leaving. Grayson must have heard it in her voice because he tightened his hold on her. "You do not have to go back today." "I do, though. It has been a week. Any longer and I am simply hiding." Diana sat up reluctantly. "My patients need me, and I cannot hide from my responsibilities forever, much as I might want to. Then I am taking you back." Grayson also sat up. "And I want to see where you live, see the situation for myself." Diana started to protest, then stopped. Having Grayson with her, even just for the trip back to town, felt like a gift she could not refuse. "All right, thank you." They ate breakfast quickly, neither wanting to draw out the inevitable. Diana dressed in her own clothes, which Grayson had washed and mended while she recovered. The dress was still worn but clean, and she felt more like herself in it. The ride down the mountain was beautiful in the morning light. Diana sat in front of Grayson on his horse, his arms around her as he managed the reins. They did not talk much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with unspoken feelings. As Gila City came into view in the valley below, Diana felt her stomach clench with anxiety. The town looked the same as always, dusty streets lined with wooden buildings, the stamp mill pounding away at the north end where the mining operations centered. But everything felt different now. She was different. They rode straight to Diana's small house on the edge of town. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a lean-to kitchen, but it served as both her home and her makeshift clinic. Even from outside they could hear someone pounding on the door. Miss Diana, are you in there? My boy is sick, please, we need help." Diana slid off the horse before it had fully stopped, hurrying to the door. A thin woman with desperate eyes turned to her with relief. "Miss Diana, thank the Lord. Billy has been burning up for 2 days now, and Dr. Marsh said there was nothing he could do, but I knew you could help if I could just find you." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. Let me just get my supplies." Diana unlocked her door and went inside, Grayson following. The house was stifling from being closed up for a week, dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Medical supplies cluttered every surface, and a narrow bed in the corner showed how little space she kept for herself. Grayson took in the cramped, chaotic space with a frown. This was where Diana lived. This was what she called home. It looked more like a storage room than a residence. Diana was already gathering supplies, her medical bag appearing from under the table. She moved with familiar efficiency, and Grayson could see the healer taking over, pushing aside the woman who had kissed him last night. "I have to go," Diana said, turning to him. "Billy Patterson is only 8 years old, if he has had a fever for 2 days. I know, go." Grayson caught her hand briefly, squeezed it. "But promise me you will eat dinner. Promise me you will sleep tonight." "I promise to try." Diana stood on tiptoe and kissed him quickly. "Will I see you again? You could not keep me away if you tried." He released her hand reluctantly. "Go on. The boy needs you." Diana hurried out with Mrs. Patterson, already asking questions about Billy's symptoms. Grayson stood alone in her tiny house, feeling the walls close in. This was not living. This was barely surviving. Diana deserved so much better than this. He spent the next hour putting her house to rights. He opened windows to air the place out, swept the floors, organized the medical supplies into something resembling order. He found her larder nearly bare, just some dried beans and a bit of cornmeal. That explained why she had eaten so ravenously at his cabin. She had been slowly starving. Grayson locked up Diana's house and rode to the general store. He bought coffee, flour, sugar, beans, rice, dried fruit, bacon, and various other staples, charging it all to his account despite the shopkeeper's curious looks. He hauled it back to Diana's house and put it away, then started a fire in her small stove and made a pot of stew that could be reheated when she got home. By the time he finished, it was late afternoon. Grayson had no desire to stay in town, but he found himself reluctant to leave. Instead, he sought out the saloon where he occasionally drank when forced into town on business. The barkeep greeted him with surprise. "Grayson Nolan, as I live and breathe, have not seen you in months. What brings you down from your mountain? Business." Grayson ordered whiskey and took it to a table in the corner. He nursed the drink slowly, listening to the conversation around him. "Heard Miss Diana was back in town. About time. My wife was getting worried. You know the Henderson baby died while she was gone. Shame about that. Poor little thing. Doc Marsh said it was inevitable, but I wonder if Miss Diana could have saved her." Grayson's hand tightened on his glass. Diana would blame herself for that death, even though it was not her fault. She had been dying herself from overwork when he found her. Where was she anyway? No one seems to know. Just disappeared for a week. Maybe she finally got smart and went back east. Not Miss Diana. She would never abandon us like that. The conversation moved on to mining news and politics, but Grayson had heard enough. He finished his drink and left, walking through the dusty streets until he found himself outside the Patterson house. Through the window, he could see Diana bending over a small bed, her face intent with concentration. She looked exhausted already, and she had only been back a few hours. Grayson turned away, heading back to where he had left his horse. He would give her space to work, but he would check on her tomorrow, and the day after that. He was not letting her work herself back into collapse. The ride back up the mountain felt longer and lonelier than ever before. The cabin was cold and empty when he arrived. Grayson built up the fire but could not shake the chill that had settled into his bones. It had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with Diana's absence. He tried to settle into his normal routine over the following days, but nothing felt right anymore. The solitude he had once treasured now felt like isolation. The silence that had been peaceful was now oppressive. He caught himself listening for Diana's footsteps, looking up expecting to see her sitting by the fire with a book, reaching out in the night for a warm body that was not there. On the third day, Grayson gave up trying to pretend everything was fine and rode back to Gila City. He found Diana at the home of a miner who had been injured in a cave-in, setting a badly broken leg while the man howled in pain. She worked with calm efficiency, despite the blood and chaos, her hand steady as she aligned the bone and bound it in splints. When she finally emerged, hours later, she looked like she was about to drop. Grayson caught her arm to steady her. "You," Diana said, a tired smile crossing her face. "What are you doing here? Checking on you, making sure you are keeping your promises." He studied her face. Shadows darkened the skin beneath her eyes, and she had already lost some of the weight she had regained. "When did you last eat?" Diana frowned. "This morning, I think." "You think?" Grayson bit back a curse. "Come on, you are getting food right now. I have 3 more patients to see this evening. They can wait 1 hour while you eat dinner." He kept his hand on her arm, steering her toward the small restaurant attached to the boarding house. Diana was too tired to argue. They sat at a corner table and Grayson ordered for both of them, making sure to get Diana the hearty beef stew and fresh bread. She ate mechanically at first, then with more enthusiasm as her body reminded her how hungry she was. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for the food you left at my house too." "That was kind. Someone needs to look after you." Grayson reached across the table and took her hand. "I worry, Diana, you are already slipping back into old patterns." "I know, but what choice do I have?" She met his eyes, pleading for understanding. "The Henderson baby died while I was gone. A little girl who might have lived if I had been here. Or might have died anyway. You said yourself that Dr. Marsh thought it was inevitable." "Dr. Marsh is a drunk and an idiot." Bitterness flooded her voice. "But people listen to him because he has the license and the authority. If I had those things, I could make real change. I could get funding for a proper hospital, hire competent nurses, stockpile medicines. But as just an assistant, I am limited to patching people up one at a time and hoping it is enough." Grayson squeezed her hand. "Have you ever thought about going east, getting a real medical degree?" "Often. But it would take years and cost money I do not have. And who would care for the people here while I was gone?" Diana shook her head. "I am trapped. I know I cannot keep going like this, but I cannot see a way out either." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her impossible situation hanging between them. Finally Grayson said, "Marry me." Diana's eyes went wide. "What? Marry me?" He said it firmly, as though the idea had not just occurred to him that very second. "Come live at the cabin. You could still practice medicine, but on your own terms. People who really need help could come to you, but you would not be at everyone's beck and call 24 hours a day. Grayson. Diana stared at him in disbelief. We have known each other for barely more than a week. You cannot be serious. I am completely serious. He leaned forward. I love you, Diana. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you collapse in the desert, so determined to help others that you destroyed yourself. You are the strongest, most stubborn, most fascinating woman I have ever met. And I know you feel something for me too. I do, Diana admitted, her eyes filling with tears. But marriage is not something to rush into. We barely know each other. What if you realize in a month that you made a terrible mistake? I will not. I have never been more certain of anything. Grayson's voice was steady, sure. But I understand if you need time. I am not going anywhere. Think about it. Take all the time you need. Diana withdrew her hand, pressing both palms to her flushed cheeks. I cannot think about this right now. I have patients waiting. I need to finish my rounds. I know. Go. Grayson stood and tossed coins on the table to cover their meal. But promise me you will think about it. About us. About whether you want to keep living like this or if you are brave enough to choose a different path. I will think about it, Diana promised. She rose on unsteady legs and left the restaurant without looking back. Grayson watched her go, his heart in his throat. He had not planned to propose. The words had simply come out, but now that they were spoken, he knew they were true. He did want to marry her. He wanted to wake up beside her every morning and fall asleep with her in his arms every night. He wanted to protect her from a world that would happily work her to death without a second thought. But Diana was right that they had only known each other a short time. He had no business asking her to uproot her life for him. Yet he could not take the words back, and he found he did not want to. She deserved someone to fight for her, to offer her a way out of the trap she was caught in. Grayson rode back to the mountains with his heart heavy and his mind racing. He tried to imagine Diana choosing to stay in town, continuing to work herself into an early grave. The thought made him sick. But he also tried to imagine her turning her back on the people who depended on her, and he knew that would destroy her in a different way. Days passed with no word. Grayson threw himself into work, preparing for the coming winter even though it was still high summer. He cut and stacked firewood until his hands blistered. He hunted and smoked meat. He reinforced the barn and patched the roof of the cabin. Anything to keep his mind and hands busy. 2 weeks after his impulsive proposal, Diana appeared at his cabin just after sunset. Grayson saw her coming up the path on a rented horse and his heart leaped. He stepped out onto the porch, waiting. Diana dismounted and tied the horse to the rail. She looked thin again, worn down. But her eyes were clear and determined as she climbed the porch steps to stand before him. I love you too, she said without preamble. I have been trying not to, telling myself it was too fast, too crazy, but I cannot help it. You are in my heart, Grayson Nolan. Relief flooded through him. Diana, she held up a hand. But I cannot marry you, not yet, not like this. The relief turned to confusion. What do you mean? I mean that I will not run away from my responsibilities. The people in Gila City need medical care, real medical care. I cannot just abandon them. Diana took a deep breath. But I also cannot keep going the way I have been. You were right about that. I will work myself to death within a year at this rate. So what are you saying? I am saying I need time to find a solution. To find someone who can take over my work or to train someone or something. I do not know exactly what yet, but give me time to do it right. Then, if you still want me, I will marry you and come live in your mountain paradise. Grayson studied her face. How much time are we talking about? 6 months, maybe a year. Diana searched his eyes, looking for understanding. I know it is a lot to ask. I know you could find someone else, someone without all my complications, but I am asking you to wait for me. Can you do that, Diana Owens? I would wait a lifetime for you if I had to." Grayson closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. "But I have conditions." "Conditions?" She pulled back to look at him suspiciously. "You visit me regularly, at least once a week. You let me come to town to check on you, and you do not work yourself sick again." His voice was firm. "If I am going to wait patiently while you arrange your affairs, then you need to take care of yourself." "Deal?" Diana smiled, the first real smile he had seen on her face since she left his cabin 2 weeks ago. "Deal. Good." Grayson kissed her then, pouring all his relief and love and fear into it. Diana kissed him back just as fiercely, her arms coming around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Stay tonight," Grayson said. "Head back in the morning. You look like you could use a good night's sleep." "I could," Diana admitted. "I have missed this place, missed you." They went inside and Grayson made dinner while Diana sat at the table and told him about the past 2 weeks. She had been researching options, writing letters to medical schools and hospitals back east. She had also been working on training 2 of the mining camp women in basic medical care, teaching them how to treat common injuries and illnesses. "It is not a perfect solution," Diana said as they ate. "But if I can train enough people in basic care, then I will only be needed for the serious cases. It would spread the work around instead of all falling on me." "That is smart," Grayson said. "Why has no one thought of that before?" "Because Dr. Marsh wants to maintain his monopoly on medical care, useless though it is. And most people assume medical knowledge is too complex for ordinary folk." Diana took a sip of water. "But basic wound care, fever management, recognizing serious symptoms. Anyone can learn that with proper instruction." "You are remarkable." Grayson shook his head in admiration. "You know that," Diana blushed. "I am just trying to find a sustainable solution, for everyone's sake, including my own." After dinner, they sat by the fire talking until the logs burned down to embers. Then they went to bed together, fully clothed again, just holding each other through the night. Grayson buried his face in Diana's hair and breathed in the scent of her, memorizing it against the lonely days ahead. True to his word, Grayson started making regular trips to Gila City. He would arrive unannounced, collect Diana from whatever she was doing, and insist she take a break to eat or rest. At first she protested, but gradually she came to look forward to his visits. They marked time in a life that had started to feel endless and overwhelming. He also began helping her in practical ways. When Diana mentioned she needed to expand her growing herb garden but had no time, Grayson showed up with fence posts and chicken wire. When she lamented the lack of clean bandages, he brought her bolts of cloth from the general store. When she was too exhausted to cook, he appeared with hot meals. The townspeople began to notice Diana's mountain man. At first they were suspicious of this large, quiet stranger who appeared in their midst. But gradually they came to appreciate his steady presence and the way he looked after their healer. "That your fellow, Mrs. Henderson?" asked one day, nodding toward where Grayson was splitting wood for Diana's stove. Diana paused in grinding herbs to watch him work. His shirt was off in the late summer heat, muscles moving smoothly under sun-browned skin as the axe rose and fell. "He is," she said softly. "Knew you could not stay alone forever. A woman like you needs a good man to look after her." Mrs. Henderson smiled. "He seems devoted, does not say much, but the way he watches you when he thinks no one is looking, that man is deep in love." Diana felt her cheeks warm. "I am in love with him too." "So when is the wedding?" "I have some things I need to arrange first, but soon. 6 months, maybe less." As summer turned to autumn, Diana made good progress on her plans. She had trained 4 women in basic medical care and they had begun helping with simple cases. She had also secured a commitment from a young doctor in Tucson who was interested in moving to Gila City if suitable arrangements could be made. His name is Dr. Robert Chen. Diana explained to Grayson one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset. His parents were Chinese immigrants, and he has been facing discrimination in Tucson. He is hoping a smaller mining town might be more accepting. Will they be? Grayson asked practically. These miners are not exactly known for their open minds. I hope so. I have been talking him up, explaining how desperately we need real medical care. And Dr. Chen came highly recommended from his medical school. He is competent, dedicated, and sober, which already makes him infinitely better than Dr. Marsh. Diana leaned against Grayson's shoulder. I think it will work. When would he arrive? Early November, if all goes as planned. He wants to see the town and the medical situation before committing fully. Diana looked up at Grayson. Which means if it works out, I could leave by the end of November, start of December at the latest. Grayson felt his heart leap. Really? That soon? That soon? Diana smiled. Think you can handle having me around full time? I will manage somehow. He kissed the top of her head, holding her close. I have been getting the cabin ready. Added another room so we will have a proper bedroom and a separate living space. Built a bigger kitchen area. Even made some furniture. You did all that. Had to do something with my worry and impatience. Figured I might as well make it productive. Grayson was quiet a moment. I want our home to be comfortable for you. I know it is not much compared to living in town, but it is perfect, Diana interrupted. I do not need much. Just you and peace and the freedom to practice medicine on my own terms. Everything else is just details. October arrived with crisp mountain air and aspens turning gold. Diana found herself counting down the days until Dr. Chen's arrival. If he agreed to take over her practice, she would finally be free. Free to marry Grayson. Free to live without the crushing weight of being solely responsible for an entire town's medical needs. Dr. Chen arrived on a gray morning in early November. He was younger than Diana expected, maybe 30 at most, with intelligent dark eyes and a quiet manner. Diana spent 3 days showing him around, introducing him to patients, explaining the medical challenges specific to a mining town. The biggest issues are injuries from the mines, she explained as they toured one of the camps. Cave-ins, falls, equipment accidents. You see a lot of crushed limbs, broken bones, head trauma. Then there are the chronic problems. Lung disease from the dust, mercury poisoning from the amalgamation process, malnutrition because miners tend to spend their money on whiskey instead of food. Dr. Chen took notes steadily, asking intelligent questions. On the 3rd evening, he sat down with Diana in her small house. Miss Owens, I have to say, what you have accomplished here is remarkable. Without formal training or credentials, you have essentially been running a medical practice single-handedly. It is impressive. Thank you, Dr. Chen, but I am ready to step back now. These people need someone with full authority and qualifications. Diana leaned forward. Can you do it? Can you take over the practice? I can. Dr. Chen nodded firmly. I would need to work with you for a few weeks, learn your systems, and meet all the regular patients. And I would want to keep using the women you trained as assistants. But yes, I can do this. Relief made Diana's eyes sting with tears. Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me. They agreed that Diana would stay through the end of November to ensure a smooth transition. She would introduce Dr. Chen to everyone, transfer all her medical records and supplies, and make sure he felt confident taking over. When Diana told Grayson the news that evening, He swept her up and spun her around, making her laugh. "So we are really doing this. You are really coming to live with me." "I really am." Diana cupped his face in her hands. "I am going to be your wife, Grayson Nolan. December then. First week of December, we get married and start our life together." Grayson set her down but kept his arms around her waist. "I love you, Diana." "I love you too." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Diana worked closely with Dr. Chen, making sure he knew everything she knew about the town and its medical needs. She said goodbye to patients she had been treating for years, reassuring them that Dr. Chen would take excellent care of them. She sold most of her furniture and belongings, keeping only what she would need in her new mountain home. The hardest goodbye was to the 4 women she had trained. They had become not just her assistants but her friends, the closest thing to family she had in Gila City. "You have to come visit," insisted Sarah Miller, one of the women. "Just because you are moving up the mountain does not mean we never get to see you." "I will visit," Diana promised. "And you can come up to the cabin too. We are not that far away." "Are you scared?" asked Emma Foster, another of her trainees. "Getting married, moving to the wilderness." Diana thought about it. "No, a little nervous maybe, but not scared. I am ready for this next chapter of my life. Ready to be with Grayson, ready to have some peace." The first Saturday in December dawned cold and clear. Grayson had arranged for the circuit preacher to meet them at the small church in Gila City. Diana wore a new dress in deep blue that brought out her eyes, purchased with money she had carefully saved. She had no family to attend, but the church was packed with patients, friends, and townspeople who had come to wish her well. Grayson stood at the front of the church wearing clean trousers, a pressed shirt, and a jacket Diana had never seen before. His hair was neatly tied back, his beard freshly trimmed. When Diana walked down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such joy that she felt her throat tighten with emotion. The ceremony was simple. They exchanged vows in steady voices, Grayson's deep and resonant, Diana's clear and sure. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and told Grayson he could kiss his bride, he did so with great tenderness while the congregation cheered. After the wedding, there was a celebration at the church hall. The townspeople had organized it as a thank you to Diana for all her years of service. There was food, music, and dancing. Grayson, it turned out, could dance when properly motivated, and he swept Diana around the floor with surprising grace for such a large man. As evening fell, they said their final goodbyes and rode out of Gila City together. All of Diana's belongings were packed on a mule that Grayson led behind his horse. Diana rode in front of him as always, his arms around her, and she had never felt safer or happier. They reached the cabin well after dark. Grayson had left lamps burning before they left, so warm light spilled from the windows. He helped Diana down and carried her over the threshold in one smooth motion, making her laugh. "Welcome home, Mrs. Nolan," he said, setting her on her feet. Diana looked around at the cabin, seeing it with new eyes. It was cozy and warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth. The new room Grayson had built was visible through a doorway, containing a large bed covered in a colorful quilt. The kitchen area was larger and better organized than she remembered. Everywhere she looked she saw signs that Grayson had been preparing for her arrival, making the space ready to be not just his home but theirs. "It is perfect," she said softly. "Absolutely perfect." Grayson came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "I am glad you think so, because this is where we start our life together." Diana turned in his arms to face him. "Make love to me," she whispered. "I want to start this marriage properly." He needed no further encouragement. Grayson swept her up and carried her into the bedroom, kicking the door shut behind them. They came together with passion born of months of waiting, of stolen kisses and restrained desire. Grayson was gentle despite his strength, taking his time to learn what made Diana gasp with pleasure. She explored the muscles and scars of his body with wondering hands, committing every detail to memory. Afterward they lay tangled together in the big bed, Diana's head on Grayson's chest, his fingers running through her hair. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "Happier than I have ever been." Diana pressed a kiss to his chest. "This feels right, like I am exactly where I am supposed to be. Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay this happy." Grayson tilted her face up to kiss her softly. "I love you, Diana Nolan. I love you too, Grayson, so much." Winter settled over the mountains, bringing snow and cold winds. But inside the cabin, Diana and Grayson built a life together filled with warmth and love. Diana set up a small medical practice, treating the few trappers and hunters who lived in the high country. Word spread that there was a skilled healer in the mountains, and people began making the journey to see her when they needed help. But the pace was manageable, nothing like the crushing demands of Gila City. Grayson taught Diana to hunt and trap, to read weather signs and animal tracks. She taught him more about herbs and healing, expanding his basic wilderness medicine knowledge. They worked together preparing for each season, putting up food for winter, planting the garden in spring, gathering wild berries in summer, harvesting in fall. One morning in early spring, Diana woke feeling queasy. She barely made it out of bed before losing the contents of her stomach in the chamber pot. Grayson was at her side instantly, holding her hair back, concern etched on his face. "Are you ill? Should I ride for Dr. Chen?" Diana wiped her mouth and sat back, a slow smile spreading across her face despite the nausea. "I do not think Dr. Chen can help with this particular condition." It took Grayson a moment to understand. When he did, his eyes went wide. We are, going to have a baby." Diana took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Around October, I think." Grayson let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into a careful hug. "A baby, we are having a baby." "We are." Diana laughed at his excitement. "Are you happy about it?" "Happy, Diana, I am." He pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes shining. "I am beyond happy. Scared too, but mostly just incredibly happy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Diana's morning sickness faded after a few weeks, and she bloomed with health through the summer months. Grayson was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried about her doing too much or lifting something heavy. Diana found his concern both endearing and exasperating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him when he tried to stop her from weeding the garden. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not going to break." "I know, but you are carrying my child. Let me worry and fuss. It makes me feel useful." Grayson knelt beside her in the garden, taking over the weeding despite her protests. In late September, as Diana's belly grew round and prominent, Grayson rode to town and brought Dr. Chen back with him. "I want him here when the baby comes," he explained, "just in case there are complications." Dr. Chen was happy to make the trip. "It will be good to check on you anyway, Mrs. Nolan. Make sure everything is progressing normally." The examination went well. "You are very healthy," Dr. Chen said. "The baby is positioned correctly, heartbeat is strong. I see no reason to expect problems. But I will stay nearby when your time comes, just to be safe." Diana went into labor on a crisp October morning. The pain started gently, barely noticeable but built steadily through the day. By evening she was gripping Grayson's hand hard enough to leave marks, breathing through the contractions while Dr. Chen coached her. "You are doing wonderfully, Mrs. Nolan. Just keep breathing. Almost there." Grayson looked pale and terrified. "Diana, I am so sorry. This is my fault. I did this to you." Despite the pain, Diana managed a weak laugh. "We did this together, and it will be worth it. You will see." After hours of labor, as the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Diana gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Dr. Chen placed the squalling infant in her arms, and she felt her heart expand with a love so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. "Look what we made," she said to Grayson, who was staring at his son with wonder. "Is he not beautiful? He is perfect. You are perfect." Grayson kissed her forehead, then gently touched the baby's tiny fist. The infant immediately gripped his father's finger with surprising strength. What should we name him? They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son's face, Diana said, "James, after my father, James Nolan." "James Nolan." Grayson tested the name and smiled. "I like it. Welcome to the world, James." Dr. Chen stayed for 3 days, making sure both Diana and the baby were healthy before returning to town. Grayson walked him out to his horse the day he left. "Thank you for coming," Grayson said. "It gave me peace of mind having you here." "It was my pleasure. Diana is doing very well, and James is a strong, healthy boy." Dr. Chen climbed into his saddle. "You have a beautiful family, Mr. Nolan. Take good care of them." "I intend to." The first year of James's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless joy. Diana marveled at how naturally Grayson took to fatherhood. He was patient and gentle with their son, singing to him in his deep voice, walking with him when he was fussy, showing him the mountains and wildlife as soon as James was old enough to look around with interest. When James was a year old, Diana discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no morning sickness, just a bone-deep tiredness that made her fall asleep in the middle of the day. In May, she gave birth to a daughter with her father's gray eyes and her mother's determination. They named her Grace. 2 children kept Diana and Grayson busy from dawn to dusk. The cabin rang with laughter and tears, with the sounds of childhood that had never graced its walls before. Grayson built furniture as the children grew, a cradle that converted to a small bed, a high chair, shelves for toys and books. Diana sewed clothes and taught them letters and numbers, preparing them for the education they would need. When James was 5 and Grace was 3, they made the decision to spend winters in Gila City so the children could attend school. Grayson was reluctant to leave the mountains, but he understood the importance of education. They bought a small house on the edge of town and split their time between mountain and valley. The arrangement worked well. James and Grace attended school during the winter months, learning reading, writing, and arithmetic. Diana took on a few patients in town during this time, though never with the crushing workload of her early years. Come spring, they would return to the mountain cabin where Grayson taught the children wilderness skills and Diana's garden flourished. Years passed peacefully. James grew tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence and love of the mountains. Grace had her mother's compassion and sharp mind, already talking about becoming a doctor someday. Grayson's hair gained threads of silver, and laugh lines deepened around his eyes. Diana filled out more, losing the gaunt thinness that had marked her when they first met, her face glowing with health and happiness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grayson surprised Diana with a trip back to the spot where he had first found her. They rode out to the desert road, now well-traveled and maintained, where she had collapsed all those years ago. "This is where my life really began," Grayson said as they stood in the late afternoon sun. "When I saw you fall, something in me woke up. I had been existing for so long, just surviving. But you reminded me what it meant to really live." Diana leaned against him, his arm coming around her shoulders. You saved my life that day. Not just my physical life, though you did that too, but you saved me from a path that would have destroyed me. You showed me there was another way, a better way. We saved each other." Grayson kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, picking you up and taking you home with me. Best decision I ever made was staying." Diana tilted her face up for a proper kiss. "I love you, Grayson Nolan. Just as much today as I did 10 years ago. Maybe more. Definitely more," Grayson agreed. "Because now I know exactly what I have, and I will never take it for granted." They rode home as the sun set, painting the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson. Back at the cabin, James had dinner waiting and Grace had picked wildflowers for the table. The family ate together, laughing and talking, the cabin filled with warmth and love. As Diana looked around at her family that evening, her children healthy and happy, her husband smiling at something James said, she felt a profound sense of contentment. Her life had not turned out anything like she expected when she first came west all those years ago. But it had turned out so much better than she ever could have imagined. Years later, when James was grown with children of his own and Grace had indeed become a doctor practicing in Tucson, Diana and Grayson would sit on their porch in the mountains and watch the sunset. Their hair had gone fully gray, their bodies marked by age and the hard work of mountain life. But their love had only deepened, growing stronger with each passing year. "Any regrets?" Grayson asked one evening, holding her hand as they rocked in chairs he had built decades before. Diana thought about it. She thought about the career she might have had if she had gone back east, the recognition she might have earned. She thought about the civilized comforts of city life, the convenience of having neighbors close by. Then she looked at the man beside her, still strong despite his years, still protective and loving. She thought about the life they had built together, the children they had raised, the peace they had found in these mountains. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "This is exactly the life I was meant to live, and you are exactly the man I was meant to love." Grayson smiled, the expression crinkling his weathered face. "I feel the same way. Every single day I thank whatever Providence sent you stumbling down that road into my life. It was not Providence. It was overwork and stupidity." But Diana smiled as she said it. "Well then, I am grateful for overwork and stupidity." Grayson lifted her hand and kissed it, "because they brought me you." As the sun dipped below the horizon and stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Diana and Grayson sat together in comfortable silence. They had weathered storms and hardships over the decades, had known loss and pain along with joy. But through it all, they had held fast to each other and the love that had sparked to life that day in the desert. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic events. It was simpler than that. It was the story of two people who found each other when they both needed saving, who built a life of quiet contentment in the wilderness, who loved each other faithfully through all the seasons of their lives. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.